The addition of elite Baylor running back Bryson Washington, very exciting, also interesting.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Lindsay Crosby of thebarnauburn.com and a million other places hanging out with us after a very busy weekend for Auburn football. Deuce Knight will now host Auburn, as well as other player movements that are interesting. The floor rose on the roster in the trenches, but does that turn into more wins? We speculate. But Bryson Washington, the addition of Bryson Washington, the elite Baylor running back, Lindsay, it's exciting. And I'm super, super stoked it happened. The timing of it's interesting because he comes into a position room that I think was already pretty solid. And I want to be very clear. I am super stoked that Auburn signed Bryson Washington. This is not me downplaying the move, but this feels like a luxury more than a need, because the question then is, okay, the timing of it is you're adding this guy before offensive linemen. Like, who's going to block for this super, super talented running back room of Cobb, of Washington, of Davenport, of Mabson, of Henderson? It's all exciting, but if you don't figure out the offensive line and get the offensive line better, how much of this does it really matter?
Maybe this is something where, and I'm going to kind of speculate a little bit because it's what else can we do? But we always hear about like wide receivers are really curious about who the quarterback is. And you would assume that all these wide receivers signed knowing that Byron Brown was going to be the quarterback. Maybe this is something you were able to get, multiple running backs in, right? Obviously you got him in, you got the guy Davenport in from USF. Maybe this is something where they've been told, here is the plan on the offensive line. Here's what we're going to do. And they're on board with it. But I do agree that it's a little bit concerning. I like the idea of like, hey, this kid was a freshman All-American in 2024. He's rushed for over 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns in the last two seasons.
Delicious.
Had injuries a bunch of 25 and was still the leader in total yardage for Baylor. It's great that, one, you get him. Two, you get to face Baylor in week 1 with him.
Right.
But I'm a little concerned about who's going to block for him, unless you're just going to do some sort of, we're going to build the whole plane out of skill position players and just,
and obviously guys are coming, right? We're being a little tongue in cheek with this. We're recording this earlier on Sunday than I would like to, but
tell them why.
The Patriots play Sunday night. And so had to get a lot of stuff done. So we'll see what happens. But obviously guys to keep track of: Cole Best, the USF transfer, the other USF transfer, Skinner on the offensive line, both those guys interior offensive linemen, as well as Tegra Shabola,
bless you,
from Ohio State. Sounds like Ole Miss is really trending for him. So I'm hopeful, but cautious with Tegra. And then King Large from SMU,
what a name,
which is a real name. And that's super exciting that Auburn may have an offensive lineman whose name is King Large, because that's unbelievable. But all of those guys trending, you feel better if you get those guys, because that's something that I talked about a ton, is like at some point you just need numbers. Mm-hmm. And I think Ramil makes sense. I think Simmons makes sense. The projected left tackle and right tackle. Everything I'm seeing has got Ramil at left tackle and Simmons at right tackle. I don't know if I fully think that that's the best thing. Doesn't matter. Both of those guys are going to start at the two tackle positions unless Auburn brings in somebody that's not really being discussed right now.
Yeah. We know they're casting a wide net, right? We've heard about guys coming in for visits. We've heard about all of this. And I do think it's worth pointing out that most of the offensive linemen that they've brought in, they've been able to get signed. Like the guys that they've targeted that have already come in, they've gotten them to join the fold. And they've gotten some key. Kyle Ellis, they got him to come back. So I feel good about the fact that They're doing the right stuff. The numbers just aren't here yet. And because the numbers aren't here, obviously we're panicking, we're worrying a little bit. But it feels like Golesh, he's getting guys are wanting to follow him. And I know USF has guys in the portal.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's an option. Yeah, it's huge. But then also like they seem to have a plan. And I will say that feels a little better than some of the previous coaches who either weren't willing to try to execute a plan or their plan was just throw all of our money at guys so they commit. So it's nice to see there's an actual plan here.
It does seem like it's a combination of the two extremes that we've seen over the last two staffs, which you hope that balance certainly comes into play. So Bryson Washington, obviously a great addition. Had a conversation with Cam Stewart of Locked On Baylor that went up yesterday afternoon. If you missed that, go check it out earlier in the feed. We also talk about the dynamics of how that impacts the first game of the season and their quarterback situation that's actually impacted indirectly by Deuce Knight. So Auburn and Baylor continuing to kind of intermingle as of late, which is interesting and adds to the drama that will be in Atlanta when the season's open, seemingly forever from now. The trenches, I think the floor went up. Does that automatically mean the ceiling goes up and you win more football games? That's next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. Obviously, the playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving all customers even more ways to get in on the action every single day of the playoffs. Right now, every college football playoff game day, which is one left, FanDuel users get a profit boost waiting for them in the app. You can ride with the favorite, and then when you can ride with the favorite when you think the team controls the matchup, or you could take a shot on the underdog if you feel an upset coming, which will be fascinating between Indiana and Miami. FanDuel is the best place to get in on the action all playoff long. So visit FanDuel.com to get your college football playoff profit boosts every single game day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. We mentioned some of the guys being added on the offensive side. Joseph Simmons coming over from JMU, Stanton Ramil coming in from Michigan State. I'd be shocked if those two guys were not your starting tackles. We'll see where they start and all of that moving in. They obviously have to add more as we have this conversation early Sunday afternoon. That's obvious. I want to talk more about the defensive front here, Lindsay. So Cody Sigler comes in from Arkansas State. Really, really like him. St. Farrior, interesting player from App State. Similar model. We've seen this before. Getting Sunbelt guys in on the defensive front. Can they take that step forward?
Big boy.
Yeah, he is big. He's large. He'll probably back up Jordan Crawford at nose, which is exactly what you need. That's
6'3",
exactly
335.
Huge. And then they add Nate Johnson at edge, formerly of Mizzou. And I think he's interesting. I would assume he is behind Jared Smith currently. Outside of Sigler, I think these guys are role players. But that's what Auburn needed to add is role players. What they do at defensive end right now, I guess Darian Smith would be the starter at defensive end if the season were to start today. Are they okay with that? Are they happy with that? There's a lot of assumptions that will have to be made on defensive line and edge, and you just kind of got to hope that some of those assumptions and guesses pay off, and they'll add a few more guys, I think. Obviously, you have to from a number standpoint, but are they going to add top-end guys to help raise the ceiling? I don't know. I think all these guys, for the most part, over the course of this weekend, with the exception of Sigler, I think they raised the floor. I don't know if they necessarily raised the ceiling.
I think when you have a DJ Durkin-led defense and you see what VKW was able to do, Vontrell King Williams, the coach, was able to do on the line, I feel like if one of these two is the place to not save money, but to prioritize. If you're prioritizing offensive line, I feel like defensive line, you're better equipped to either cover up the deficiencies in your position group with the scheme, or get the most out of the guys you have with the VKW. It feels like the thing I'm concerned about is it feels like the defensive line has kind of been built around one guy. Keldrick Falk was the guy. It's always like been a guy. And then after them, you had guys who fit into roles to work around that guy. And my question is, who is that guy?
Yeah.
I don't think you have that. I do think that's probably the one thing that may hold you back. Malik Autry, I mean, he had what he was he's a former 5-star, but can he be that guy? I don't know. I think it kind of feels like you're
can
missing
Jared
the one
Smith
high-end
be
piece.
that guy?
Maybe,
can Jordan Crawford be that guy? You can make the argument for all. Joe Phillips was as highly touted as they. I mean, Georgia wanted him so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, Hugh had to kind of up the ante and say, "Hey, let's lock this down. Let's get it done." And I like the staff did what it took to hold on to him, but we just haven't seen him hardly at all. The first, I guess it's been the first 2 seasons for him at Auburn. So can he be that guy? So we're just,
Phillips
all of these guys, there's a clear path for them being impactful. It's just none of them have already been impactful. And when that's the entire room, it's a little risky. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. And look, all these signings individually, they make sense. Cody Sigler from Arkansas State makes your team better. St. Farrior from App State makes your team better. Nate Johnson from Missouri makes your team better. It's just where they slot in, which I think all of these guys are backups as it currently sits. Could Sigler beat out Autry? Possibly. I think that could be a situational thing. I don't think there's any way Nate Johnson beats out Jared Smith. I just don't. I don't think there's any way St. Farrior beats out a Jordan Crawford. I just don't. They could. That'd be great. And then are you okay with Darian Smith being your starting defensive end? That's just a question they're going to have to handle internally versus all the money. And then do we get a step forward for JJ Falk? I think that's going to be fun to see as well. Kelby Collins, the transfer from Alabama, he's kind of being linked to Auburn. We'll see if they make a move and are aggressive to get him to kind of beef up that defensive front.
Yeah.
I think they're going to have to add maybe 2 or 3 more guys, Lindsay. And if you get a guy like Kelby Collins to commit from Alabama, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's the one thing that you can kind of look at with a lot of these guys. It's been, for the most part, I mean, Johnson was a Missouri guy, but a lot of this has been counting on guys to take a step up and perform. And I do think if you can get somebody who was a starter or a backup with a lot of playing time in the SEC, that's probably not foundational, but that's probably a reliable piece you can build around. And again, I know that Johnson came from Missouri. Nate Johnson came from Missouri. I think he was on track to be the third edge guy behind their 2 starters.
Yeah. I tweeted something out from John Miller of Locked On Mizzou who talked about that.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I think if we had added Nate Johnson like Mizzou did from App State, he went from he did the typical Sun Belt to SEC step at Missouri. He just got beat out by a guy whose last name was something Kitchens. And I think if we have just gotten him from App State, so I'm reading that this is from 247, starting his career at App State, Johnson had 42 tackles, 7.5 sacks in 2023, had 34 tackles and 2.5 sacks in 2024 before transferring to Missouri for the 2025 season, where he had 6 tackles and 13 tackles for loss in the past 3 seasons. I think if we are getting him from App State, I think more people would be like, oh, the upside's there. Now, my argument is I don't think all of that potential upside goes away just because he moved to an SEC school.
Right.
He didn't get worse while he was at Missouri. It's just he didn't play because he was on track to be their number 3 guy, according to John Miller, host of Locked On Mizzou. And I want to be clear, I don't think that's a guy you could still add a guy like that if that's what the intended role is. If you're bringing him in to compete for a starting spot with Jared Smith, or maybe look at positional versatility if you wanted to put him at end, which I don't think is what's happening here, then I think it's a question worth asking. But if he's to build depth in an edge room that desperately needed this, Nate Johnson makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and it all comes down to what other pieces. He can't be, obviously, and he's not going to be. He's 2 or 3 more guys coming in. I do think it's really interesting, though, and this is just a little side observation here. A lot of our guys who transferred out from the line have gone, the ones who have committed so far have gone to SEC schools, right? It's not been, it's been like Mars Williams went to Georgia, Jamonta Walder went to Arkansas, Malik Blockton went to LSU. That one kind of hurt for me.
Sure.
And so we're getting guys who are moving up for the most part. And again, even Nate Johnson was a moving up to the SEC guy. I'd love to see some commits come from other SEC schools where, they were heavily recruited out of high school for a reason. It didn't work out in their previous school and they're coming here just for the peace of mind. But at the end of the day, all that matters is what they do on the field. And I do think DJ Durkin, having the strong linebackers that he does and having the scheme that he does that kind of manufactures and creates havoc, I do think you can get by without that superstar on the line. Obviously, you don't want to, but I do think that it's easier to get by without that superstar there because of what DJ Durkin does on defense.
Or do you have the superstar on the line? We just don't know who he is yet. I mean,
True.
if Jared Smith was top 3 in the SEC in sacks next year, I would not be shocked. It'd be a leap, and we're all expecting a leap. Just how big is that leap? I mean, he's pretty long. His strides to leaping could be pretty impressive. That's a joke there. But yeah, Malik Autry and Jordan Crawford could take those tremendous steps too. So we'll just see how all of the chips fall. It's very clear, especially defensively, that they're leaning on this sophomore class in the defensive back room, in the linebacker room with Melendez and Diaz, with Jared Smith and Joe Phillips at edge, with this defensive line class of Autry, Crawford, and Smith. And then on the offensive side too, now a lot of those guys are sophomores from USF. Doesn't matter, but that's the core of this team. So take that for what it's worth. Another guy, just real quick, because we're about to kind of pivot to other guys that left that are going to impact Auburn's season in a different way. Jake Johnson, the tight end from North Carolina. I love it. I absolutely, this is a veteran football player. Has played a ton of football player at Texas A&M, had a decent role at North Carolina last year where he played a tight end role that asked him to line up in line, attached to the offensive line, as well as in the slot. It was pretty close to balanced on that. And that's what we've talked about with Golesh type tight ends. And I do think, and this might be somewhat my fault, but I do think there's been a little bit of a buildup as far as the expectation for the tight end in the passing game. A lot hinges on the tight end for what Golesh does schematically and formationally. The passing game doesn't always go through the tight end. I mean, you can look at Jonathan Eccles, who was one of his tight ends at USF last year. His stats don't jump off the page at you. They're part of the offense. They're a part of the passing attack, but it's not like the passing attack goes through the tight end. And Jake Johnson, I mean, he's a guy who you have to respect in the passing game. He's been a kind of just a piece of the passing game everywhere he's been. And that's exactly what he's going to be asked to do, while also lining up maybe a little bit more in the backfield than he did previously as like an H-back, as well as being attached to the offensive line, in line, and then also at the slot. Jake Johnson, to me, fits exactly what Alex Golesh wants to do. And I also think this move was a last-minute pivot when they realized that they weren't going to get, is it Pittman? Is it Ricky Pittman? Is that his name?
Out of Florida State. From
Florida State. Yeah, he went elsewhere. I think he's going to SMU. And
Gus Tourette. Gus Tourette. Gus Malzahn Tourette.
That's right. Yeah, there we go. So I do think the addition of Jake Johnson, the former UNC tight end, I think it makes so much sense, Lindsay.
On the note of usage in the offense, tight ends at USF last year came in 6th and 8th in targets in the passing game. But playing time, they were on the field a ton.
Right.
But 6th and 8th in targets. The leader had 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. So weren't used a ton, but they were on in the passing game, but they were on the field a ton and they had their moments. They collectively caught, I think it was 6 touchdowns as a unit last year, which is not nothing. But
no, it's a piece of the passing attack.
Yeah.
But they're everything formationally.
Yeah.
And I think Jake Johnson and Jonathan Eccles can fit that. Xavier Newsom, I just need to see more of. He played at Howard. I can't find a whole lot on him. But the fact that his former head coach wanted him at his position that he's coaching, that's usually a pretty good endorsement of, yes, I believe in you. So
they had a tight end number 3 in skill position snaps last year, yet he was 8th in targets. So like, what's that tell you? On the field a ton, doing a lot of stuff. You need him.
We take it. Deuce Knight going to Ole Miss is fascinating for several reasons. Let's touch on that next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Wayfair. Goodness, Lindsay, Wayfair has like everything. They have everything. The new year's here, and it's the perfect time to reset your routine and, more importantly, refresh your space. If you're spending more time at home, we both work from home. We're here all the time. You might as well love how it looks and how it feels. We have several pieces of furniture from Wayfair. Lindsay, we've ordered multiple bookshelves from Wayfair. The TV stand in our room is from Wayfair. We have a few chairs from Wayfair, as well as our dining room table and dining room chairs, all from Wayfair. This is a Wayfair household.
What way? Wayfair. This leather desk chair that I'm in, from Wayfair. I have a couch coming to match. Just going to go right back there, from Wayfair.
Yes.
And I have a record cabinet to hold all of my plentiful records coming from Wayfair.
I didn't realize you got that from Wayfair. Yeah, it's a very nice.
Yes, got that
very
from
cool.
Wayfair. Very nice.
Get
stuff.
organized, refreshed, and back on track this year for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That is WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. All right, final few minutes on this Monday edition of Locked On Auburn. Deuce Knight, that saga of drama and anticipation seems to be done. He has chosen Ole Miss, and I think there's a ripple down effect of this that impacts a lot of things. One, the most obvious, with the Trinidad situation at Ole Miss, he's going to file an appeal to get a waiver. We'll see if that works or not. But odds are, when Auburn goes to Oxford in what will be a very important game in 2026, Deuce Knight will be hosting the Auburn Tigers as what we assume he will be in a position to be Ole Miss's starting quarterback. So that's obviously the first part.
On Halloween, by the way.
Yeah, because that game couldn't get any weirder already. That's great.
Yep.
Another aspect of this is going into the weekend, there was still questions on, like, DJ Lagway was trending towards Baylor, which is obviously Auburn's first opponent. But then when the Trinidad stuff happened, it seemed like Ole Miss was either going to take DJ Lagway or Deuce Knight. And so now all of a sudden this situation is impacting 2 of Auburn's opponents in 2026. And then also another one that's obvious. Okay, who is Auburn's QB2 in this situation? And so, right now as we record this, it's Byron Brown, Lachlan Hewlett, and then Reese Brush. But they had the Oklahoma State backup, Taya,
I think
on campus, which is okay, which is fine. But I do wonder if they get a little bit more aggressive with the potential QB2 now that the Deuce Knight stuff seems to be done.
Yeah, that's kind of what you have to do.
A lot of stuff. This move impacts a lot of different things for Auburn.
Yeah, I think you're at the point. I mean, you have to figure out QB2 now. There was always the possibility that Deuce would be back. Reportedly, he was in town for a while, meeting with some coaches and things. But now that he has committed, I don't know if he's signed or not at the time of recording, but he's committed at least.
Yeah,
you've got to find a QB2. The thing that I wonder about is, are you able to recreate the Ashton Daniels situation? Because that whole thing was unique because he had power conference experience, but he was coming in to sit, knowing that he would be the backup unless something went wrong. And of course, it totally did.
Right.
And so can you find a guy to do that, to come in knowing? And I think ideally you find somebody who has multiple years left and you can sell him on the promise of being the starter after Byron Brown graduates and is done, or graduates again, or whatever he does. But that's the hard thing here, is you got to figure out something. And the sell isn't the easiest in the world because you can't sell them on a position battle. Like, come on. They're not going to beat Byron Brown. They're just not.
Right.
And you can't afford to just throw money at the position to get anybody because you've got to have money for the offensive line, like we talked about.
Yeah. O-line and D-line deserve the rest of the money right now. 100%.
Exactly. So you have to sell them on future playing time and the culture and all of that. And that's not the easiest thing in the world to do, especially with a dead period of a couple days that starts today.
So I don't think this will happen. Like, I don't think Auburn will go into the season with Lachlan Hewlett as QB2. I don't think that'll happen. I'm going to say it one more time. I do not think this will happen. But we do know that the staff loves him. And last week had Brian Smith on, who's watched him in person at 7-on-7 camps and was blown away by him. And he's like, you don't see him call, like, you don't see QBs call their own plays, and they let him call his own plays. And he had incredible arm talent through with anticipation and all of that. And I just kind of wonder if the staff likes him enough to do that. There's also the element of there's going to be quarterbacks that are in the portal without a team after spring that kind of serve as a potential QB2 guy. I just, there's too many guys in the portal and not enough open spots where there's going to be guys, whether it's strategically by design or strategically where they have to pivot to do the strategy, there are going to be guys that just have to wait. And then maybe they become the most appealing option later in the process.
I would be remiss if I didn't point out that both TJ Finley and Walker White are in the portal.
I wouldn't hate Walker White coming back. I don't think that fits the QB2 thing, right? No. That doesn't fit the Q. Like, I don't think there's anything there that's like drastically different than Lachlan being QB2. And I don't think either of us feel super comfortable with that.
Holden Garner is also in the portal. I didn't realize that. I've been looking. All three of Auburn's former quarterbacks are in the portal.
Yeah, so similar situation there. Situation there. So, we'll see what they do. I don't think it's like ultimately important, but I don't think it's ultimately important that you get a guy before spring, but obviously you need someone. And there's a chance that they feel good about Hewlett. I can't imagine them going into the season with just 3 scholarship QBs. I think they will get a 4th one. Would be very clear. I think they will get a 4th one, but the dynamic of that is interesting, and it is impacted by Deuce Knight leaving.
Yeah, I mean, now that Deuce is gone, you got to do something. And to your point, I haven't really thought about the whole thing of a kid just not signing until after spring, but I guess there's always, I mean, that's totally a thing.
That's what happens when you're going to have 4,000 kids in the transfer portal. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, there's some guys who have played a lot of college football who are still in there. And I do think that's part of it too, is so many guys being able to get these waivers and stick around for an extra year. I do think that's part of it as well. We still have guys we're talking about who have issues from 2020 where that season didn't count. And then they had a red shirt for something else. And then the medical thing, and they're still playing. So I do think that is something that make it a little bit better in the future. But right now it's totally an issue, and you may take a guy later because you have to, but yeah. Also a good reason why they're not doing full spring games anymore, because can you imagine losing your QB1 in spring with no portal after that to go get a guy?
Which is the way it's been through most of life, and college football was great without us needing to do that.
But you could also get and keep recruits from high school. Guys weren't transferring that much. You could have a second guy on, in the room who was your future.
You're right. You're absolutely right. All right. Lindsay, Crosby, how can people check out everything you've got going on?
I'm on social media at Crosby Baseball, the Atlanta Braves content, bravestoday.com. Yep. Also the Auburn stuff. Talked to Sonny DeShera just the other day about the Barn Baseball Show and when that's going to start back up, and some fun stuff we might be doing over here for baseball this year.
Yes. Stay tuned for that. That announcement is coming very soon. Please like the video. Please subscribe. We'll see you next time. This has been Locked on Auburn.